Thank you for joining us for The Drive Back, the movie podcast where we imitate our favorite thing to do after a movie, which is to talk about it on the ride home. I'm Garrett, and of course, I'm joined by my good friend and co host Adrian.
Hey.
And today we have a franchise fever episode. We love doing these because we get to do entire franchises all at once. This is the episode where we look at an entire franchise from beginning to end, watch each film, rate and review them all, and then look at them in a tiered list from least good to most good. And today we have something a little bit special because we have the eighth movie in this franchise coming out in a couple weeks, and that is the Conjuring franchise. So all of this and more coming up on The Drive Back. Another franchise fever episode. Adrian, how is this for you? Like, did you have to rewatch? I mean, we obviously rewatch these movies, but what was the experience like, man?
I had seen all of these in theaters except for La Llorona. I watched at home like a couple years ago when it came out, like right when it came out on streaming or DVD. I watched it, but I had seen all of these. I definitely needed to rewatch them. A lot of these movies had blended together for me.
Yes.
While watching the first Conjuring, there were a lot of things that I thought happened in the second and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely needed to rewatch them. So it was, I mean, it's enjoyable. I like scary movies a lot, so it's always fun to watch them and see kind of how the genre's changed over the course of this universe specifically and how jump scares have changed and all the little tactics.
Yeah, for those of you who have been listening to the podcast for a while, I am not a horror guy at all. Especially well, that's not entirely true. I love movies like Midsommar and The Lighthouse and The Witch, which are all incredible films. I'm not a fan of Hollywood horror movies, like big Hollywood ones, the ones that are made for a super small budget just to make money at Halloween time. Those are the ones that I hate, which some of these would usually fall in that category, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
But I had not seen any of these movies except for the first Conjuring. I did see the first Conjuring in theaters when it came out on a date, which that was probably a good choice for a date movie. But because you get scared.
I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I loved the first Conjuring when it came out. I bought it on Blu-ray as soon as it released, and because it was such a big turning point, I was like, wow, a big Hollywood movie that's not all jump scares. But we'll get there in a minute. So we've got 7 movies to get through, and I know some of you are probably thinking, Adrian, Garrett, why are you putting Curse of La Llorona on this list? And that's because it's a part of the Conjuring Universe.
Yeah.
Even though Warner Brothers tried to dismiss it when it came out and said that it was from the producers of The Conjuring and not anything to do with the Conjuring Universe, we'll talk more about it when we get there, but it is a part of the universe pretty concretely. So
It's like the Incredible Hulk of the MCU.
kind of, yeah. But we'll get there in a moment. We're going to go ahead and start. We're going to be looking at these movies in chronological release order, from the first movie released in the franchise to the latest. So let's go ahead and start, because we got a lot to get through. The first film is The Conjuring. Released in 2013, it was directed by James Wan and stars Vera Farmiga, Patrick Wilson, and Ron Livingston. Supposedly based on a true story, paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren work to help a family terrorized by a dark presence in their farmhouse. So, as I kind of said in the beginning, I loved this movie as far as a Hollywood horror movie goes. What's your general thoughts real quick before we dive into some more spoiler stuff?
Sure, I liked it in the theaters, and I mean, I guess I don't want to give away my ranking, but I liked it. I mean, it's a good scary movie for what it is. I think it definitely set a precedent for the entire, what do we call this, the TCU, the Conjuring Universe. I think it definitely kind of outlined the look and feel. We'll definitely get into some of the other movies later where I think that the benchmark that this movie set was maybe enforced a little bit too hard later on, and it definitely affected my opinion kind of on the rewatch of a lot of them. Because uh, here's kind of my overall opinion. When you watch them multiple years apart, they're the late. Each one is like the latest and greatest scary movie that's come out. When
Hmm.
you watch them all kind of back to back, you can really start to pick apart the S tiers from the A tiers to the B tiers to the ones that just aren't good. And I think that was well worth the rewatch just on its own.
Yeah, totally fair. And I mean, I hadn't seen any of them, so it was kind of easy to kind of follow along when I don't have to
Hmm.
wait a couple of years. I guess it's kind of like watching the MCU now, where you don't have to wait years upon years. You can just immediately go to the next thing. But let's go ahead and drop spoilers for Conjuring. We're going to talk story and we're going to talk characters. Um, so, spoilers out of the way for The Conjuring. One of the best parts of this movie, in my opinion, are Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga as Ed and Lorraine Warren. They
Yes.
are they have incredible chemistry together, which is an important part of it. They also have a unique like hold on the role, especially Vera Farmiga, who got to work with Lorraine Warren, the actual real life person,
Yeah.
and nail her, mannerisms and her speech patterns. So it really comes off as someone who did their research. And same with Patrick Wilson. Really kind of takes this role onto his own, which is kind of interesting that he's just James Wan's favorite actor to work with, because he was also in all the Insidious movies, which were also James Wan, and he was in Aquaman, which was James Wan. So, it was a
Yeah.
surprise he wasn't in the James Wan Fast and Furious movie, because that would have been interesting.
I don't know how they would have tied him in. That would have been really interesting to see.
Patrick Wilson's one of those actors where, like, I love him and everything he's in, but, like, you could just put him in a movie and it's just
Yeah,
that one
he's just
guy.
one of those characters. I mean, to me, he's become, oh, that's the guy from The Conjuring. Like
Yeah, or
anything that he's
Insidious.
in,
Yeah.
either, but oh, the scary movie guy. Like
Yeah.
that's just who he is now. So in Fast and the Furious, it would have been, I would have thought the movie was headed into a horror franchise if they put him in it. I would have been like, oh, a crossover event. Nice. But this one is I guess I don't want to give him away my ranking, but this is definitely the staple of the series. I mean, it definitely comes out swinging in a lot of new ideas. There was a ton of innovation that happened on this movie in terms of
Yes.
how scares work
Mm-hmm.
and how like camera shots in horror movies function.
Yes.
And I think you can definitely tell. I mean, it feels fresh if you've never seen it. It definitely does not play out like an Insidious movie. It does not play out like a Paranormal Activity movie. It's completely its own idea, and it just feels really fresh to watch, even after all this time to watch it again.
Yeah. And, I mean, to be fair, again, I'm not a horror person, and I really like this movie. And, like, I remember watching this with my mom on Halloween, I think the year after it came out, or the year it came out. And she doesn't like horror movies ever, usually, except for unless they're, like, super smart. And this one she actually enjoyed for the most part. I think I remember, because it wasn't hingent on jump scares. There were jump scares in the movie, but they and this coming from me is very big. They actually worked for the most part in this film. It's
Yeah.
kind of the needle point of the tension that's been building the whole time, because the tension's my favorite part. The lead up to the scare is more scary to me than the actual like bleh, which I hate.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but like this movie, also what really helps with that, and we'll get into this more with the Conjuring 2 as well, is an incredible use of practical effects,
Yeah.
which there's very little CG in this movie, which really helps to accentuate that it feels a little bit more real, even though ghosts may or may not be real depending on who you are. It feels more like tangible. It feels more like it could actually be happening.
Yeah, and I think something about specifically the two Conjuring films that works so much better, and specifically in the first one, is the investigative aspect that's
Hmm.
going on. While the movie isn't necessarily like one of those documentary films
Oh
or
no.
mockumentary films, but it has enough of it in there that it feels like it's based on a true story, which I know it's supposed to be. I haven't done
Hmm.
my research, so I can't say whether it is or not. But I know that at least the way that they set up the interview and the way that it's sprinkled throughout, that, oh, we are still recording all of this, we are still filming it. All of that is just in there enough that it feels like it's factual. Just enough to where it kind of you can suspend your disbelief and just enjoy the scariness of the film.
Yes, yeah, and a lot of that is again through the practical effects, also the acting. I feel like everyone for the most part in this movie really holds their own,
Yeah.
and again, especially the main actors, obviously the Ed and Lorraine Warrens, but also the parents of the family. They really put in the work, and it's one of the few times in a Hollywood horror movie that I do care about the characters. Whether or not I agree with Ed and Lorraine Warren believing in ghosts and all that is
Yeah.
irrelevant. It's like I still grow to care for these characters, which is very important.
And something too to note about this film that kind of subverted expectations was that this was kind of I don't want to say it was the first, but it's kind of one of the first that I can remember where where everybody in the film believes in the haunting. In a lot of scary movies, you get at least one person who, even while things are flying around the house, is like, "This can't be a ghost."
That's
Like,
me.
yeah, well, then you would die in the film. But in this movie, uh, the dad is a little bit hesitant, but not like he still goes along. He believes his family,
Hmm.
like to the point where he's willing to call. He's not against any of it, and then very quickly he's on board because they're full on haunted by a demon.
Yeah.
Like there's a full and everyone believes that there is no like, oh, is it not happening or is it? It just fully dives in, and I think the movie is better for it because you don't have that trope of that person trying to negate everything you're doing.
Hmm.
It's just a wild ride, and they just accept it, and you accept it, and it's better for it.
And one of the stronger things about actually the entire franchise as a whole is that whatever's happening in each particular film happens to multiple people very early. So you don't
Hmm.
get the whole like, oh no, they're crazy, plot thread. Like, no, it's the only one that's happening to because they're the one that's being targeted. They're the one that's possessed or whatever.
Yeah,
Everyone sees something, whether it's little or major. Everyone is involved in something. Whereas
exactly.
in real life, you know, is a completely different story. But we're not looking at real life; we're looking at the film. But I do like that because I mean, it does create more tension. It creates more of an urgency for characters to act in the way that they should.
I did find myself really enjoying. I forget her name now, but it was so. I want to say the demon's name was like Bushmael or Bashma, the witch
I don't
from,
remember the name.
but it was something like Bushmael, and I was literally thinking like that is the most demon name you could possibly give someone. If
Yeah,
someone was like, "Oh, who are you marrying?" "Oh, Bushmael." "Oh, so that's a demon." Like, there's just no way that no one thought about that back in
I
the day.
I don't know. Yeah, because it sounds like an actual demon name, but I don't think that they would use a real demon name in the movie because people out there would be like, "Oh, you're gonna conjure it."
Oh, there's been plenty of movies that use real demon names.
That's true. Well, I mean, nothing's gonna come out of the screen or anything, but yeah, I mean, other than that, I think one of the other strongest points of this movie is James Wan as a director.
Yes. Oh, you can
Um,
tell, yeah.
he is one of my favorite directors working in the industry just because of how young he still is and how much work he's put out that's quality. I mean, I haven't seen the Insidious films, but they're highly regarded. At least the first two, which are the ones he did,
Yeah.
are highly regarded. Both Conjurings are highly regarded. Aquaman
Unfortunately, he's
is a
not
fun one.
returning for the third one, which is very
Yes,
sad.
which we'll talk about when we talk about Curse of La Llorona.
Yeah.
Um,
The name is Bathsheba is
oh,
the
okay.
demon's
So it's
name,
Sheba
which
taking a bath.
yes, but I mean, who did not know that that was that was a witch? That made I was thinking that about that so hard that that's just a wild demon name. And of course it's a demon.
It, it's like straight out of some sort of like sacred text. Like,
That's like the
oh,
title
Bathsheba.
page of the satanic, whatever you call it, the encyclopedia of the devil is like Bathsheba,
Chapter
right on
1,
the first page.
Bathsheba.
I do want to mention too, though, that this movie has one in particular, a scare that I still think holds up to this day that I've thought about multiple times since initially watching this movie and continuously, is the scene where Lorraine Warren is hanging sheets out after washing them, and the storm kind of comes in, and one of the sheets gets pulled, and it stops as if like it wraps around an invisible figure
And then it disappears,
for
and
just a
then
second, and then it disappears and then goes up to the window. And the way that that whole scene happens and how it draws your eye up to the window so that you don't miss anything. I mean, it's art. It really is. That specific scene is absolutely incredible to this day. I think it's really, really well done.
yeah, and it's one of the few movies on this list where, again, almost every scare really sticks the landing because it feels earned. It doesn't
Yeah,
just
and I
feel
don't think
like
they
let's
they
throw a
ever
corpse at
go.
someone.
Yeah, and they never go over the top. and it always feels like it's the right time for the scare. And that's why I think this one stands out from actually all the others, is that, like you just said, everything that happens in this movie makes sense. And from the movie standpoint, like
Hmm.
as you go through it, everything that's happening, you kind of sit there and go, "Oh, well, that would happen. That makes sense." And it
Yeah.
just feels better.
Fair enough. Well, are there any critiques about the film before we start moving on?
Yeah, I think the critique is that this movie just doesn't, at least to me, and I love scary movies, so this is probably very take it with a lot of salt. This movie is not scary anymore to me. I think we get a lot of movies like it, especially with this whole universe. That now, when it came out, I think it was very original, and it still has some of that essence to it. But now it just kind of feels like, with all these other Conjuring Universe movies, that it's just another one.
Yeah.
And that is a little tiresome. I mean, anytime we get any of these, it kind of just starts to feel like it's going to be the same movie.
Yeah.
Kind of like how we all, or I felt about Insidious 3. It's like it's the exact same film, just reskinned.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how this feels going back. But I do have to give this movie credit for being the first and creating that kind of this horror genre that this movie falls into.
Or at least this universe and this kind of,
Yeah,
this collective of films. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of one of my critiques too. Is that I don't really, at least in the scope of film, I don't find ghost stories or spirits or demons or anything like that particularly scary. Just because, well, I don't believe they exist. So it's kind of like, okay, I'm watching a fantasy movie. I get more scared with more like how the people are, right? Like, so movies like Midsommar are infinitely scarier to me than The Conjuring
yeah,
ever.
sure.
Or like not the others. What's it called? Oh, the really popular one with the masked people that break into people's house.
Isn't it the
Strangers
others? Oh, Strangers. Yeah, with the bunny. Yeah, yeah, Strangers.
with like the hood masks and like
Yeah,
the silent three people. Yeah, that's
yeah.
scarier to me than any of this. So, but yeah, let's go ahead and wrap this up and move on because we're gonna have probably some more exciting things to say about the next few. So The Conjuring, Adrian, what are your final thoughts and your score?
Final thoughts are, if you haven't seen it, this is it's a great horror movie. The first time watching it specifically, I think you're in for a real ride. If you have seen it before, I definitely don't think you need to go out and rewatch it. I think the way that you remember it is probably better. It does feel very tired on the second and third rewatch. It just feels kind of like the same thing that we've been getting with all these other movies we'll talk about in a second. But if it is your first time, I could not recommend it enough. This is definitely up there with like the first Insidious. I would say, oh my gosh, what is that called? Oh, Sinister. Like those first installments of all those series definitely paved the way for horror as it is now, and they're definitely worth watching in that sense if you haven't seen them. So, with all that being said, I gave this movie an 82.
All right. Um,
That is the highest score I'll be giving for this entire episode.
Same here. Yeah. Basically, my final thoughts, the same thing you'll probably see on my Letterboxd profile and anywhere you look that has my opinion. I think The Conjuring is a well-crafted horror film that stands head and shoulders above the other films in its genre from the 2010s. I think it has incredibly masterful camera work, especially in the beginning with the zoom through the house and all that. And standout performances that make it a must-watch for not just film fans, but horror fans. And I will disagree. I think if you have seen it before, you should watch it again. I did. So, but at the end of the day, I give it an 87. I honestly think it's one of the strongest Hollywood horror movies that's come out in the last at least 20 years.
Sure.
So, on the other side of the spectrum, we're moving on to Annabelle. The second film in the franchise, released in 2014, it was directed by John R. Leonetti and stars Ward Horton, Annabelle Wallis, and Alfre Woodard. Set around the doll featured in The Conjuring, a couple begins to experience terrifying supernatural occurrences involving a vintage doll shortly after their home is invaded by satanic cultists. So this one I had not seen before. I think you said you had seen it before.
I've seen them all. Yeah.
So from this point on, I have not seen any of the films
Okay.
before my recent watches.
So what did you think?
Uh, it wasn't as bad as a lot of the reviews had said and a lot of consensuses. It still wasn't good by any stretch of the imagination. I would say it's less than mediocre. Of the three Annabelle films, I would say it's probably the second best. which we'll get more into that later. Um, but again, like none of the performances stood out. The problem for me was that it became really much more tied to jump scares and less about building tension and meaningful release of that tension, as much as it was about showing a demon face or making a loud noise. That being said, there are still inventive scares here and there,
Totally.
like way things work and how when things move by themselves. There's gonna be ones. There's gonna be pieces of that in every movie on this list, except for one. Um, but other than that, I mean, it's fine. I mean, it wasn't insulting to my intelligence or anything like that.
No, I don't think it's that
But
bad.
I wouldn't say that I enjoyed it though. So what about you?
Yeah. Again, all of these. So I'm not going to say it again, but all these were scarier in the theater for sure. The first time watching them,
Oh,
I think
absolutely.
there's just something about going to get scared that makes it scarier. Like you are just in that mindset. So that's a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but this movie, I 100% agree that it relied way too much on unearned jump scares that didn't even make sense camera wise for a certain port, like for certain ones. But there were, I think, two or three scares that were very inventive. And this is kind of, yeah, I guess we'll get into spoilers with that. But yeah, I think it's okay. This is definitely not the best film. There's better Annabelles, there's better movies in the entire universe of The Conjuring. So this one was okay. I mean, it's part of the story. All of these are kind of one of those things, just like the MCU. Just because you don't like Thor doesn't mean you can't not watch those because they have stories that are part of the overall arc
Yeah.
of the entire universe. So it's a must watch in the sense that if you're going to commit to this universe, you got to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're just kind of like a passive viewer, there's definitely other scary movies that would go way above this one.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And as we're going to transition into some spoiler talk here. I am curious to see what the two inventive scares you thought were. But the other the one thing I wanted to mention, and it is a critique about this movie, is with this film specifically, and there are a couple others in the universe we'll talk about later. It just seems like an idea that wasn't fully formed into a script yet or anything, and it was just stretched out for time.
Hmm.
And they had kind of like what you thought happened with King Arthur: Legend of the Sword, where it was moments that they had planned and then just filled in the rest.
Yeah, it almost seems like solid 10-minute segments of this film are set up to just lead into the next jump scare.
Yes.
Like they thought about the jump scare and then went, okay, but how can we put them in that scenario? And then
Yeah.
there's 10 to 15 minutes spent getting them into that position to be jump scared. And it's just like, okay, fine.
Yeah, and the other issue is too, in doing so, they create characters that I have no care in the world about. I don't know why I
Yeah.
should care about them. One of them's becoming a doctor, maybe. The other one's pregnant. I don't like kids, so why should I care about that? And
Yeah.
then a great actress, Alfre Woodard, is in this as the bookshop owner, and even she was just mediocre in this movie. So maybe it was
And I
the
think that's
film.
the script in the film. I think just all of it coming together. I don't know if it got chopped up on the editing floor.
Maybe
Um,
release the Annabelle
but
cut.
yeah, that would be so good. I would love where like the Warrens, like the Warren found footage version of all of them. That'd be a
Hmm.
cool idea. I would definitely, I'd watch that. I'm invested enough that I would absolutely watch alternate versions of these movies. That is how much I do like them.
Fair enough. But
Um,
so the two scares that you thought were inventive.
so one of the scares is more just overall in the movie. I think it is an absolute nightmare that somebody can be in the same space as me and I wouldn't know it. So in the very beginning, when the husband runs over to the other house, and then she runs back in to call 911, and then you see them in her house, that to me is just a horrifying nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
Like that
Definitely.
is just absolutely terrifying to me. But as far as so a lot of those scenes where they and I think this did it more so than the initial Conjuring, that there's like the presence that someone's near and this person doesn't know, was
Yes.
done quite a lot in this movie, and I think that was very scary. So I
Mm-hmm.
still hold that I liked that. The jump scare that I thought was really innovative was unfortunately shown in the trailer, which is a bummer. So if you want to see it, you can just view it anywhere. But it's where there's the young girl across the hall, and then she starts jogging towards the door, and then she turns into the
Yeah.
older version, and so it was ruined. But I think that's very creative. I wish they had would have
Oh yeah.
saved that for the actual movie because it was really good.
It was a great editing moment too, because you can't really
Yeah.
tell when she switches.
No, and that's what
So
makes it scary because you're thinking, okay, what's this little girl going to do? And then it's not even the little girl anymore. It's the older
yeah,
version of her, and it's a really good switch that happens. And I wish they would have saved it, but I do think that was great editing, and it was a good idea for a jump scare.
yeah, absolutely. And it's just, I don't, yeah, like the one of my critiques about this movie, and a couple of the jump scares are a part of it, and it's the same complaints I'm gonna have about Annabelle Comes Home and Annabelle Creation,
Create.
both of them, or all three of them, I should say, is that you see the demon way too much.
Oh yeah,
It ruins it for me. Like
yeah.
I prefer the moments when you can't see anything, and that because that's horrifying. Like
Well, I think the
even me, I
unknown.
don't believe in ghosts, but if I see something move, that's gonna freak me out more than someone standing in the corner of the room.
Yeah, well, the unknown, I think, is where this movie really jumped the gun.
Yes.
They really like that's where Insidious was successful as well. And the first Conjuring is you don't see anything like it gets crazier and crazier, but you don't know the source until they're ready to show you.
Yeah.
And this movie's like, oh, did you want to see the demon? Here it like here you go. First 20
Here we go.
minutes.
You know what?
There you
Hey,
go.
and you know what? Here, keep it.
Yeah, for the
You
whole
paid
movie.
admission. Here's your demon.
But
Like,
then it totally loses that whole like, what could this thing possibly look like? What could be happening? What's going on? You're like, oh, it's that demon.
and not to mention, it's the most generic looking demon ever.
Yeah, I mean, I
Like,
think I've seen tons of TV shows with demons that look better than this one
oh
does.
yeah, like the Insidious, the Darth Maul looking demon is way more iconic and scarier looking than this one is.
Yeah,
And it's because it's just, oh, he's got black skin, he's got horns, he's probably got that little impy tail, and he's probably missing his little pitchfork somewhere. Like,
that's it.
it's
Yeah,
kind of ridiculous. Yeah, which I mean, most of this movie is ridiculous. And that's where a lot of my
yeah.
complaints string from. But
I will say that we'll talk about it in Annabelle Creation, but there is a tie-in in the very beginning of the movie that did make this movie better for me, knowing the backstory of Annabelle Creation.
yes, I know
That
what you're
makes
talking
it carry a little more weight. So I do have to credit it with that kind of addition to its rating because it if we're talking about the franchise as a whole, this movie is made better by its counterparts, and brought up kind of together with the whole team with that whole story of Annabelle.
Yeah,
So I
you do
did
have to
factor
look at
that.
it individually though, on some level.
Well, yeah, but it is brought up slightly for me just because this is the whole franchise, and I do think that if we're reviewing the whole franchise, we had to watch them all, so that does affect my opinion of it.
Fair
Um,
enough.
but individually, I mean, yeah, I think that tie-in does make it a little better, but I think this movie gets very lost in just like we talked about, just jump scare to jump scare,
Hmm.
to the point where it's just like, okay, if I'm ready to be scared every 20 minutes, I just know that,
Yeah.
and I'm already I'm zoning out because I'm just it's the same thing over and over again.
Exactly, and it's important to note that for me, a lot of these movies are losing points forward going forward because they have jump scares, and not because they have them, but the sheer number of them. That's what really loses me, and we'll really talk about that in one particular movie, which we'll get to. But let's go ahead and wrap this one up because we still got five more movies to talk about. So Annabelle, final thoughts and rating.
Sure. Final thoughts. This movie is definitely one of the weaker ones in the franchise. It was a good stab at kind of expanding the universe, but it was refined more later on, which we'll talk about. But this one does have a really good chunk of the story in it. It's very much needed in that grand scheme, big picture kind of viewing. And because of that, I gave this movie a 75. Oh no, sorry, 65. I think this movie's pretty weak. I think it definitely is nowhere near the first Conjuring by any stretch. But it is a fun watch, and again, all of these they're just scary movies. So if you're looking for that Friday night movie that you can just put on and have a couple of scares, like one or two, that's all this one's going to give you. The rest of it, you'll probably be making fun of it with your friends,
Mm-hmm.
which is also super fun. So I don't want to give it an overly negative score because it is entertaining in that sense. But it's definitely not the best by any stretch.
I would, yeah, because that's how I actually watched the last movie on our list, which is Curse of La Llorona. I watched it last night with a couple of friends, and towards the end, we just started making fun of it. And you're right, it does raise your enjoyment of the movie, you know, but it also makes it a little bit more palatable to sit through, depending on the film. So yeah, 65. I a little bit different. I'd say it's a less than mediocre film that isn't as scary as one would think. Performances are fine, but the real problem here is an idea being stretched into a feature-length movie with no thought to how it should flow from scene to scene or why we should care about the characters. And so that's why I ended up giving it a 34.
Okay.
So, moving on, right along, is the third film in the franchise, which is The Conjuring 2. Released in 2016, it was directed by James Wan and stars Vera Farmiga, Patrick Wilson, and Madison Wolfe. Again, supposedly based on a real life case file, Ed and Lorraine Warren travel to North London to help a single mother raising 4 children alone in a house plagued by a supernatural spirit. Again, a film that I had not seen and did not know what to expect.
Yeah, this is one that I didn't remember watching at all. Which I don't know if that's a credit to how forgettable it is, but I have seen this movie. I have the ticket stub from when I went to see this movie, and I did not remember any of it. So I don't know what that says, but it was fun to watch it. It kind of had that hint of like it was ringing a bell, and it was very predictable to me. But I definitely, yeah, it was a fresh watch for me, I guess.
Well, to be a little bit different, I like this movie just as much as the first one.
Oh, I liked it. Yeah, oh,
Yeah,
I
I
liked it.
like. I actually think it's just as strong as the first Conjuring in terms of its camera work, in terms of its story. The only problem that I would say happens with this movie is it focuses a little bit too much on characters they want to develop into sequels instead of focusing on the actual task at hand. But we'll talk about that once we more get into spoilers. But yeah, I think this is as strong as the first movie, and I might actually go out and buy it. I enjoyed it that much.
Yeah, I don't get me wrong. Because I forgot it when I was in high school as a teenager, that doesn't mean it wasn't good.
Mm-hmm.
It is very good. I'd still stick with that. I think it's pretty predictable.
Oh yeah.
I think it's very laid out, but if in terms of the camera work and kind of the innovation of the scares and kind of updating the horror genre, this movie did the same thing that the first one did.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. It kind of took a tried and proved concept and made it a little bit different and a little bit scarier, in as much as they could. And it definitely, yeah, it's a good movie.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and drop a spoiler warning and get into spoilers. The first critique I would like to address is the side characters that get way too much focus. First off is the nun. Um, I don't know why, or Valak, as we learn that their name is. Um, I excuse my French, but why the hell should we care about that character? Like, I get that it's supposed to be this main villain, but there's an incredibly pointless scene in the Warren's house where she sees the demon walking through and gets the name. It does give the actual genuine good jump scare that did get me when the picture frame comes off the wall and runs at her, which
Mm-hmm.
that's a really cool sequence. But the whole scene leading up to that just feels pointless. And maybe it's because maybe it feels like it wasn't directed by James Wan. Maybe it was directed by the person that was going to do the Nun film. I don't know.
No,
Um,
I think it was directed by James Wan.
oh, I mean, fair. Well, that
Yeah.
sequence I meant.
Oh,
But so the nun kind of felt pointless, and again, we'll discuss it when we get to the nun. But and the Crooked Man is the other character that gets some focus in this, which is confirmed to have some sort of movie in development about the Crooked Man, which is weird
there
because they.
actually is one that came out that is it's not part of this universe. It was like a fan made film, and it is terrible.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely horrific.
But I mean, I do like the Crooked Man character. I think it's a very unique looking like spirit or demon or whatever you want to call it. Um, it does get a little. It doesn't nearly get as much focus as Valak does. Even though I think the Crooked Man's supposed to be Valak in a different form.
I don't know if it's a different form. I think it's that Valak was using these other spirits
Oh, that's fair.
to distract from it being the source so that it could infest the girl.
Exactly. Yeah. But let's go ahead and talk some good stuff. Again, as we said, this movie is just as like well done in terms of the actual behind the scenes and the technical aspects. James Wan, again, is a great director. Again, Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson really hold their own in this movie. I would say just as much so, the newcomer, which would be the mother of the family, also holds her own as well. And I actually enjoyed the side storyline involving I think it's the scientist that's trying to prove that spirits exist because he wants to see his wife again.
Yeah, I forget his name, but yeah.
I enjoyed his storyline. And one of the other biggest strengths about this movie is that there's this house is apparently so infested that stuff happened in front of a television crew and everyone saw it. There's a lot of people in that room, and yet miraculously no footage exists in real life. But
Or does it and it's all classified?
No, whatever. That's a conspiracy theory for another day.
If you're watching me,
I'm gonna
my
keep being
eyebrows
cheeky with
are
my anti-ghost
above
comments.
my head.
Oh no. So what anything positive you want to mention about the film?
I'd like actually talked about a negative. You talked about a negative right away, so I'll
Sure.
talk about a negative. I think that the whole dynamic from the Warrens about like their pushback, how Lorraine sees Ed die, so she doesn't want to take a case, and then he tries to take a case, but like is secret, but doesn't want her to know, and all this stuff. There is not nearly enough pushback. Like all of them are like, we can't take any more cases because you'll die. And then Ed goes, I promise not to die. And she goes, oh, okay, then we can do it. And
It's
then
not that simple, but okay.
it literally happens in like 20 seconds in the
Oh,
movie.
it does. And she's like, but I saw you die, and he's like, well, what if you were put here to prevent me from dying? That was the reason.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's romantic, but I mean, that's not going to convince me.
And then he's also like, she's out by the chicken coop and he's getting in the car. He goes, oh, I'm going to run to the grocery store. And she goes, you can't lie to me. And then he goes, yeah, the priest called. He wants me to go check on a case. And she goes, well, I'm coming with you. And he goes, no, like this, you need to take time or whatever. And then she goes, no. And then he goes, all right, get in the car. And it's like, there's just, to me, that whole, like, I get that they set up the storyline with the whole tree and the death thing and all that. But it just didn't continue to have enough weight for me. It kind of felt like they were throwing it away like it didn't matter. And that was kind of a nitpick for me. And that kind of led to the story just not, at least that portion of the story, not really feeling impactful to me. But the actual story about the house and everything going on was very interesting. And yeah, I think the fact that it was such a high profile thing in the movie, that it was like even the police officers come and a chair slides across the floor in front of them. Like it's so high profile that I could totally see. I think that's something that horror movies don't usually do. They usually make it like, oh, this is an isolated incident that no one else knows about except this family.
Mm-hmm.
And this one was like, no, this is really scary, and the entire world knows about it, and we're trying to figure it out. And I think that was an interesting kind of subversion of my expectations.
I just love the entire sequence. They're coming out of the house with the officers, and they're like, well, we're going to file a report because that's all we can do. It's like,
Well, and then she's like, what do you mean that's all you can do? It's like, girl, obviously you have demons in your house. Like, why are you calling the police?
oh, you got demons in your house, love.
Seriously.
But I mean, that's pretty much all I have to say about this film. It's as strong as the first one for me, except it just focuses a little too much on a pointless side character for me. But
Yeah, I think I would have been more interested to see it pan out with just the old man and have something be happening with him in isolation. But the fact that he was being controlled and trapped, like I feel like they just.
well, I do like that storyline idea. If the demon doing it wasn't like interconnected with the Warrens' drama, like
I think it would have been cool too if it was just we never saw the demon.
yeah,
That we just figured out that it was, oh, he's being controlled by someone. Let's figure out the name and let's banish it. And then the old man is free and he can see his family again.
yeah. And again,
I think it could have just been done way better.
yeah, and again, my criticism for the entire franchise still stands. You see the spirits and demons too much.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the only critique I have for James Wan and all the directors involved. Stop showing them.
Yeah, and I think that's everyone's kind of collective feedback, but they're so reliant on the jump scares for almost all these that it's like we need to have the demon in there so that way it can scare them.
Yeah.
And it's just too much of it.
I feel like a lot of these movies could learn from The Invisible Man and have more shots that
Yeah.
just linger, and you're like, what am I supposed to be looking for? Because that's scarier to me. But
Yeah, and sometimes those shots have nothing in them.
Yeah.
But the fact that it makes us as the viewer, like I love this. Here's actually, I think you just hit the main problem for me. I love when movies show like they have that obvious camera work that something scary is going to happen, but then nothing happens. And in this
Mm-hmm.
movie, something happens 100% of the time, to the point where when the camera literally hits a certain angle, your brain now knows that there's a scare coming. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be so much better if it just showed us open rooms, dark rooms, and then nothing happened, because then we wouldn't know when something's going to happen or not. But 100% of the time, without fail, when the camera gets into the scare mode, there's going to be a scare. And I think that's worse for it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But let's go ahead and drop some final thoughts in the rating. We can move on. Final thoughts for Conjuring 2?
Yeah, I think it's great. I think this and The Conjuring are definitely the strongest in the whole film or in the whole franchise. I could see an argument that the others didn't even need to be made, because The Conjuring itself is a great series.
With the
So this is
exception of
very
maybe
good.
one.
Even then, if it's just one out of like seven, does it
Yeah,
need to happen? I feel like you could have
true.
just made another Conjuring that would have been really good.
Hopefully three's good.
Yeah. But I think yeah, this one's definitely strong. Definitely like in that top two area. So I gave this movie a 79. It does miss a little bit, kind of like with the whole weight of this story and kind of getting too big for its own good and kind of trying to tackle too much of this like multi demon plot. I'm all for those. I'm actually a huge fan of when there's multiple demons inside a single person. I think that is very scary. But this is more like, oh, a demon here is controlling this demon, who's controlling this demon, who's controlling this demon, who's trying to control the girl. And I think it's just a little too convoluted for its own good. I think simpler and more mysterious would have been better than constantly revealing multiple demons. I think they were misled a little bit in that. So I just give it a 79. It misses a couple marks, but it's still overall great movie, good camera work, good scares for the most part, and just well done.
Yeah, pretty fair. There is what I meant to say. Excuse me. Yeah, I'd say it's an equally engaging follow up that continues the strong performances as well as the well crafted scares and ambiance, but it loses some of its focus when dealing with the characters it wants to set up for sequels. And I end up giving it an 83. Again, I think it's pretty much as strong as the first one. So
Yeah.
hopefully
Just
the
misses a couple
misses are the same
marks,
way.
and for me, it missed a couple in predictability as well.
A
I
little bit,
feel
yeah.
like the first one kind of took me more for a ride, and this one was a little bit more like, oh, okay, well, this is probably going to happen.
Yeah, it does kind of play on the idea, like, oh, when it's daytime in the movie, nothing's going to happen, so I can take a break. When, like, they go into the house and the news crew's, like, filming this,
Yeah.
reception. But, so it does play with it a little bit. But all right, moving right along, because we still have quite a few to do. Number 4 is Annabelle Creation, released in 2017. It was directed by David F. Sandberg and stars Anthony LaPaglia, Samara Lee, and Miranda Otto. 12 years after the tragic death of their little girl, a dollmaker and his wife welcome a nun and several girls from a shuttered orphanage into their home, where they become the target of the dollmaker's possessed creation, Annabelle. Again, I'm going to keep saying it, a movie that I had not seen. This one is surprising.
Yes.
I didn't expect to enjoy it as much as I did. It's still not anything extraordinary, but it's a lot better than the other films in this franchise, save the Conjuring films. And a lot of that comes down to David F. Sandberg, the director of Shazam, who did a great job on this movie, actually.
Yeah, I think this movie is I would say is like a Conjuring adjacent, which obviously it is by it being in the universe, but I mean like in terms of the quality
Mm-hmm.
and the freshness of the ideas. I think taking us this isn't really a spoiler, but taking us back in time was kind of refreshing as well, because a lot of us are used to scary movies happening in modern day.
Mm-hmm.
And I think going back in time kind of presented some challenges and some scares that we don't think about day to day, in terms of like technology wise and just the way that the lifestyle was and what's available in the home and all that kind of stuff. I think that was a really smart move, and I think just even just the actual scene that the movie set was very interesting. Just the whole world that it built in itself, I was fascinated with.
Yeah,
So I think it definitely won in that department.
absolutely. Let's go ahead and drop a spoiler warning so we can get some quick discussion done before we review it, or rate it, excuse me. But yeah, again, like a good direction on this film, and it actually has some pretty good ambiance to it. My critique from Annabelle still stands that they show the demon a little too much, even though it does end up possessing. I think it's Judy is the girl's name, who then becomes Annabelle. But actually, surprisingly good child actors as well.
Yeah, for a movie that solely relied on child actors, it did
Yeah,
pretty well.
and I think there was one of the older girls that comes with the nun is the same girl from Shazam that plays the oldest sister in the foster home.
Oh, I think you are totally right.
Yeah, and
I didn't put
I
that
enjoyed her
together.
in both of these. I thought she was great.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things I do want to highlight with this movie is that it had probably it has the best story out of all five of the spin-offs, because for me it was so strong in the fact that you had these characters, and if you really want to read into this movie, it's about grief, right? They lose their
Yeah.
daughter, and they pray to whatever power will listen to them, and it just happens to be a demon that says hi, and then they begin to start atoning for that mistake. It's a very well done story, and I actually enjoyed like the backstory of it. The story of the actual film with the scaring and the possession and all that, it's whatever. But the reason why we're at this situation, like, that is so strong. The reason that we are having these people in the house, that there is something haunting it, was really, really strong.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that I really do like the backbone of the story, which is grief and loss and all that stuff, and repentance and all of that kind of stuff was really well done. I also just still don't understand, because maybe it's just because I wasn't this kind of kid. I was curious, but if someone told me this room's off limits, I just didn't go in that room like
Yeah,
that. But in this movie, like literally, people are like, a very mysterious, thick man who's the father in the family. He comes up and is like, "You will never touch that. Go in there. Don't do it." Like very like evil sounding as well. And
yeah,
then
but
just
then
goes right in.
but then you later like learn that that comes from a place of like protection, and not so
No,
much
oh
like
yeah, but I'm saying
yeah.
the gravity, the way that he says it is clearly, I think even a child would
Oh,
understand, very serious.
yeah, and then the girl's like yoink and just
Like
goes right
that,
in.
like the first night. Like they're like they are tucked in for their first night of sleep, and she gets up and she's like, "I'm gonna go in that room," and everyone's like, "We're not supposed to be in here," and she's like, "Well, you can go. I'm gonna hang out."
Call the cops. Who cares? Who's gonna do anything?
Like it, that to me was very kind of silly, but it did make the overall story was very interesting, and I think having someone that was physically disabled with the little girl with polio presented a lot of different problems in terms of like maneuverability around the house, and getting away from things and just being stuck, and I think they played into that relatively well.
Yeah, I think this movie is just very strong. It in pretty much every aspect. I wouldn't say it's incredibly strong, but
Sure.
it coming off, or well, since coming with the next three movies, it's a very surprising film in terms of how effective it is.
Yeah.
Um, but that's honestly that's really all I have to say about it. It's one of those movies that like it's too good to be true, so you should watch it because you won't expect how good it is.
And if you watch them in order of release order, the reveal kind of at the end of this movie
Oh, mind
really
blowing.
pays off. Yeah, it is very, very well done.
Yeah. So I mean that's all I got to say about it. You want to move on to
Yeah,
some final thoughts?
sure. It's a good movie. Top three. Definitely go watch it if you're gonna only hand pick from them. But if you are planning on watching all of them, watch them in release order because the payoff at the end is well worth it. If you are investing the time, it'll make the movie that much better. And because of that, I gave this movie a 74.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I pretty much said it's a surprising follow up to Annabelle that provides surprisingly good child actors, great direction, and a unique story. However, again, its reliance on jump scares does hold it back a little bit, and they do show the demons too much. So I ended up giving it a 70, which was a lot higher than I thought I was going to give the
Yeah,
film.
it's not
So,
bad at all.
not by any means, and I hope that David F. Sandberg continues to get a lot of work because he's a pretty talented director. Moving right along, the fifth film in the franchise is The Nun. Released in 2018, it was directed by Corin Hardy and stars Demian Bashir, Taissa Farmiga, and Jonas Bloquet. A priest with a haunted past and a novice on the threshold of her final vows are sent by the Vatican to investigate the death of a young nun in Romania and confront a malevolent force in the form of a demonic nun. What did you think about The Nun, Adrian?
This movie sucks. This movie is not fun. It's not good by any real stretch. The acting's not good. It's just all around not good. That's like my entire review of this movie. Is it's just not good. The jump scares are literally the most obvious and overused thing in this movie. It is just like they built this whole movie to be one continuous string of jump scares, and it just gets so tiresome. The story is kind of there, but not really. Like it doesn't really follow anything besides maybe one or two loose threads throughout the whole movie. And it just doesn't feel good. Like it doesn't feel. The only thing I could give this movie is that I would love to watch this with friends and make fun of it. I think it's very funny. I think there's a lot of ridiculous things that happen that are hilarious.
I am actually going to completely disagree with you.
Okay.
I think it's the best in the franchise. About being the worst. This
Okay.
movie is
Wow.
ridiculous. I hate this movie with a passion.
My neck hurts. I just got whiplash.
I wanted to lead you astray. This movie, there were several points that I wanted to turn it off. I almost couldn't finish this movie.
Yeah, it's
so
super
bad.
dumb. Yeah.
The story makes no sense. The characters, I don't give a shit about any of these characters.
At all.
Which sucks because I love Demian Bashir as an actor. I think he's a really good actor, and he's perfect for playing an exorcist father type role.
Totally.
But, like, even he can't save this movie. Vera Farmiga's daughter's in this movie, which she also seems like she could be a pretty good actress. She can't seem to hold it either. It's like the only thing that this movie earns points with me on is it's in a setting that is somewhat unique. I like the idea that it's a monastery built on top of a hellhole. That's kind of cool. I don't have any care for spoilers. You shouldn't watch this film. Like where there's like that cult thing going on, where like the demon starts coming out of the hole. Like, you know,
but then the Knights Templar.
Well, I'm getting there. The image of it coming out is actually kind of cool, and it's kind of like some D&D type imagery. But then they come in, they're like, "Oh yeah, and the priest had the blood of Christ," and it's like, no, that's the stupidest plot line I've ever heard. And then when Taissa Farmiga spits it in the demon's face, like, you just put blood in your mouth. Okay, cool.
The blood of Christ.
Yeah, well, it's not wine, I can tell you that. And then just the idea that, like, you know, it was like attacked during World War II. I'm really nitpicking for good things in this movie. It is borderline unwatchable.
I nitpicked and I can't really find anything. None of the jump scares pay off.
Nope.
Maybe one that is again in the trailer where the nun is like behind the girl. So she turns around and you think like you're safe for a second, and then another nun comes out from the side. And that is like oh whoa. That's all this movie has, and it was in the trailer.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my final thought. This movie sucks.
Yeah, I don't even want to go on. Like, this movie is just so bad. Final thought. That was your final thought. What's your score?
My final score is a 32. A stark departure from the other three. This movie is just not good. I don't think it needed to be made by any stretch. I get what they were going for in this like expanded universe thing, but they just need more mystery. A lot of these movies from here on out over-explain the demons and the like demonic arts that are happening and the hauntings. They over-explain instead of just making it mysterious. I love the mystery. Let me piece together the puzzle of what I think is happening. Mm-hmm. They literally have exposition for so long in this film in particular that's like, here's exactly what has happened. Okay, cool, now I know, and now I don't care.
All this exposition for a character that we already know dies in a movie that already came out. So there's no point.
Well, gets condemned back to hell, doesn't it?
Sure, whatever.
Yeah.
It's no longer going to be in the franchise. So you're like, oh yeah, it came from this part of hell, and it was raised, and it's like super creepy, but then, you know, it ends up being sent back, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
This film doesn't matter. It's a stain on the film industry. So you gave it a 32? Cool. This movie makes me angry. my review, it's a pointless, borderline unwatchable, and completely hinges on nothing but jump scares, centering on a character Valak that we don't grow to fear in Conjuring 2, and human characters that we refuse to care about. It's hard to find a reason to care. I gave it a 5.
Nice.
The only thing that saves it is that it's a somewhat unique location, and it's got some cool imagery. That's about it.
If that.
Yeah, if that, and I'm really stretching it here. So let's go ahead.
I think
and
like
move
the
on.
Van Helsing with Hugh Jackman had a better set than this movie.
Oh yeah, The Room had better sets than a lot of this movie. So, and a lot of it was CGI. But at least the franchise starts to go up a tad from here, a little bit.
Oh, I disagree.
Oh, well, we'll see what happens. The sixth film in the franchise is Annabelle Comes Home. Released in 2019, it was directed by Gary Dauberman and stars McKenna Grace, Vera Farmiga, and Patrick Wilson. While babysitting the daughter of Ed and Lorraine Warren, a teenager and her friend unknowingly awaken an evil spirit trapped in a doll. Yeah, this movie, while not as bad as The Nun,
Agreed.
is about on the same level as the first Annabelle film. Maybe a little bit less, I would say.
Yeah.
In the fact that, and one of the biggest complaints I have is that a lot of this movie doesn't have to do with Annabelle.
No.
It's like, oh, here's a werewolf for no reason. Here's also this ferryman spirit with coins for no reason. Again, it feels like they're setting up more sequels down the road that they can make for $100,000 and make millions on.
Totally. And so I understand. I love horror movies, and I understand that the people in horror movies have to be dumb.
Yes.
I understand that. I accept that. However, when I forget her name, but the friend comes over.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, spoilers. We're past that. When the friend comes over, and there's literally like 17 locks on the ghost's door. And this family is a known, like, publicly, especially with The Conjuring 2, publicly deals with demonic arts and is very dangerous. This girl, like, just walks in and literally touches every ancient artifact in this room. Like, no care in the world is like, oh, I'm going to touch the piano that's haunted. I'm going to touch this thing that's haunted. And then just lets Annabelle out as well. But like you said, Annabelle isn't the main point. It's almost like they tried to go for literally like an Avengers Endgame team up of demons.
Yeah.
But just, and then didn't. They stopped at like 3 or 4. So we got like weird messages of like how crazy this is supposed to be. And it was just really lame overall. I think the characters were too dumb for the movie and none of it made sense.
Yeah, it's almost like, you know, I'll get this straight. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in demons. I don't believe in any of that. But I would never go into the home of the Warrens, regardless if I believe it or not, and say the crap that woman said in front of the door. Oh, I call upon all the spirits in this building to unlock the... That's the stupidest thing. And I get it, where I understand she wants to experience these things to know that there is something, because then she'll hopefully see her father. It's a stupid storyline, but at least there's one there, which earns some points. It's more of a storyline than in The Nun.
That's true.
Yeah, and at least there is, and one thing I will compliment this movie on, there is an emotional sequence at the end where Vera Farmiga, who instead of being like, no, you're going to prison for breaking and entering, is like, here's this thing from your dad, and he says that he knows it's not your fault. He still loves you. He misses you. I do actually enjoy that sequence. I felt like that was actually properly emotional.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, which
I
actually
thought,
that did get me.
I thought that tied it together nicely. However, I did think it was absolutely insane that Lorraine Warren said, oh, you had to find out the hard way that some things are evil. Yeah, if by find out the hard way you mean almost got dragged to hell, yeah, that's the hard way to find things out. Like, the end of the movie it had that nice, like, light moment of the whole father-daughter, like, here's the bracelet in the picture and all that. But they literally let out, like, 30 demons, and we're all just gonna pretend like, ooh, you're not even grounded. It's like these people spent their whole life working on containing all this stuff, and one girl can release all of them, and no one cares.
There actually was another cool sequence I wanted to highlight when the babysitter gets on the phone with Lorraine, and it is her voice, but then it starts trailing off like we
Yeah,
need her soul. Like that was actually kind of cool, and I like that. One of the other things I did like too was the primary babysitter. I can't remember her name. I think Mary Ellen. I think
sure.
when she starts encountering this stuff with the ferryman, there are a lot of awesome moments when she's walking around the house and you see some of those dead spirits that are just like standing in the corner and will
Yeah.
just turn their head. That stuff scares me more than any kind of jump scare ever will, and that was really effective.
Yeah, because it's that whole idea, like we talked about in the other one, where there's like a presence there that you don't know about. And that is horrifying.
Yeah.
And I wish the movie played more into that. But this movie also just relies way too much on jump scares and neat jump scares that they are trying to throw in, like, oh, well, this is the ferryman, so he's going to scare you like this. And they like kind of tried to do this whole style thing based on what demon you're dealing with. And it just none of it worked for me. I thought it was all pretty lame. And then the super lame scene that I thought was the whole like color wheel in the bedroom.
Oh, because I want to have some sort of creepy light.
But then when it falls over and then it's like turning and Annabelle moves with each turn.
Yeah, they were trying to be inventive, probably, but just didn't stick.
Well, because it was so slow. And it was like once they did the first tick, I was like, okay, so Annabelle's moving with the light thing. And that this whole movie was not good. It's better than The Nun. I would say watch this one over The Nun, but this is also kind of bottom of the barrel for me.
Cool. Is that your final thoughts?
Yeah, sure. I give this movie a 42.
Wow. Okay. Um, yeah. One other thing I wanted to highlight. Two things I wanted to highlight. Number one is that the title sequence in this movie is the same as the first two Conjuring films, which never gets copied again. Where it has like the thing that scrolls up with the title. I did enjoy that. I think that was
Yeah.
that they actually brought that back. I do want to disagree. I think Kiernan Shipka, who played the daughter of Ed and Lorraine Warren, actually gave a pretty good performance in this movie for the most part for playing
Okay.
the weirdo that's been in on all the information. Um, the one thing that really also is weird too is the end credits that starts playing like an '80s pop song. This movie felt like it would have been made in the '80s, like with that kind of ending and like everything's fine, and then it starts playing the joyful pop music. It was just kind of weird. But at the end of the day, final thoughts for me. It's the typical Hollywood horror of the 2000s on all jump scare, no story, no development, a joyless mess saved by a good performance from Kieran and Shipka and some actually good atmosphere, especially during the ferryman sequences. But I ended up giving Annabelle Comes Home a 33.
Nice.
So, moving on to the last film in the franchise, which is the seventh film, is The Curse of La Llorona. Released in 2019, it was directed by Michael Chavez and stars Linda Cardellini, Raymond Cruz, and Patricia Velasquez. Ignoring the eerie warning of a troubled mother suspected of child endangerment, a social worker and her own kids are soon drawn into a frightening supernatural realm. I am interested to see what you have to say about this one.
Am I first? I hate this movie. When I saw this movie for the first time I saw this one at home, but for the first time, with all the others in this entire series, I left talking with friends about the positives and being like, that was so crazy how they did this, or even joking about the bad stuff. Um, Collectively, my entire family and girlfriend, when we left watching this in a TV, were just severely disappointed. It's just not good. I think the movie sets up a lot of really good stuff in the first half. It really seems like it's gonna go, and then it just becomes an absolute mess. At the end, you can tell how low budget the film was. There's just it's so transparent, and this is what I talked about in the very beginning to bring it full circle. Pretty much any movie that's not one of the title The Conjurings feels like they were told in directing, don't make it as good as The Conjuring because The Conjuring needs to be our best film. And I think I maybe read that somewhere, but I like it is absolutely, I 100% relate to it that it feels like this movie is trying to be directed by James Wan and it literally has like very similar things that happen in it, but it just doesn't land by any means.
That's completely fair. I'm actually going to disagree. I actually like this film.
For real? You did this
Yes,
last time.
actually.
Okay.
Yeah, I think honestly, it's not to spoil my rankings, but it's fourth out of seven for me.
Wow.
And the biggest part of that, and I want to make this very clear, Number one, this score probably would have been lower if I didn't watch it with friends.
Okay.
It did raise my enjoyment of the film to watch it with friends, and we could joke around about it and all that. The other biggest reason in the film is Linda Cardellini. I love her as an actress,
Yeah.
and she carries this film.
I think the kid actors do really well too.
They do, yeah. And so, like, performance wise, this movie is strong. Even the shaman guy, I can't remember his name. He's serviceable as the kind of priest or Warren
Oh, I
stand-in.
disagree. I disagree with his performance. I think his performance was pretty weak.
His storyline's weird, but like performance wise, he's playing a shady character for a reason because he wants to bait out La Llorona. No consensus for spoilers here. I'm not saying I gave this movie a very good score. Just compared to The Nun and the other two Annabelle films, it is stronger than them, I feel. Just because of performance alone.
Sure.
And I think that when you said that this movie felt like it was trying to be directed by James Wan, I kind of took that more in a slightly positive direction. If anything, it's kind of like, to me, this shows that, okay, this director could, because this is the same director that's doing Conjuring 3. This shows me that
I
you,
didn't know that.
yeah. So I was like, you could be able to do it. You still have a lot to prove, but to me, this is like, okay, you at least understand how James Wan, or trying to understand how James Wan does his atmosphere.
I think I know where the disconnect might be, and it might be that I grew up with the tale of La Llorona in my
Maybe.
household. So like there is a ton of lore and backstory and things that they could have done in this movie that they didn't. They chose like the bare bones stuff and then sometimes just changed the entire legend
Oh, yeah.
to kind of fit their own narrative. Also that it took place in LA when it's a Mexican like children's scary story. They could have just done it in Mexico. And to me,
Yeah.
that's where like all the low budget stuff really came in. The entire like second half of the movie takes place in basically one room.
In a
Like,
house, yeah.
but even then, it mostly even takes place in like that one main area.
Yeah.
And to me, it just felt like it missed a lot. This also felt very similar to The Nun, where they had these ideas for jump scares, like the car windows, and then it's like 10 minutes building up to that one jump scare, and that's just what the whole movie felt like for me. And yeah, maybe it is because I kind of know the original tale and kind of I grew up with it, so I was very afraid of it growing up. And this one just definitely felt watered down and Americanized.
Oh, definitely. The legend and the story itself is incredibly whitewashed. Not
Yeah.
not the fact that it's like a white actress playing La Llorona or anything like that. No, it's like you're taking it and dumbing it down for American audiences.
To me, it was almost like they were literally like, "Oh, I bet 90% of our audience hasn't heard of this tale, so we can just make it whatever we want to."
And it's probably, I was gonna say, it's probably the reason why it was distanced from the Conjuring franchise, even though they show Annabelle in this movie, and this Father Perez from the first Annabelle movie is in this one as well.
And actually, a bigger role, I would say.
Slightly, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
he doesn't get freaking yeeted out the church in this one, but
yeah.
it's still, he's still there. Um, and the one thing I do want to highlight too is that it also does show more of like the shamanistic magic way of dealing with spirits, which is very important to me. Just because, again, it might not be good, but like at least it shows something that's other than the Catholicism Christian way of dealing with spirits.
100%. I'm always all for that. I think there's many ways to deal with stuff. That's why I liked an even Paranormal Activity where it was like, oh, well, if we pour this in front of the door, we can keep it. Like, oh, I love all that stuff and like seancing a house, and I think that's all fascinating. But there was one scene exactly what you're talking about where they were like, okay, we got to get La Llorona out of the house, and then we got to close the door off with our magic. So the whole like half an hour is spent trying to get her out the front door. And then they get her out the front door, they do the thing, and then someone goes, the back door. And it's like, you think we're playing games here? Like, there's a demon in your house, and you're just forgetting that you have a whole entryway into your house? And like, there were so many
Well,
points in this movie that were like that,
to
that just felt
play
like,
to
"Ah,
play La
okay.
Llorona's advocate on this one, like the shaman guy was trying to bait her in so he wouldn't have done the back door on purpose. Just throwing that out there. I mean, again, I'm really clutching
But
at
you're,
straws here, but
yeah, but I'm telling you that no one else in the family that wasn't aware of this was like, hmm, wait, the window's open. Like, can
yeah.
she get in through there?
I'd like to point out my friends and I who watched this, Kevin, Nadia, and Stacy, if you're listening to this, the fact that we just joked about the shaman being obsessed with eggs for the entire point, like the rest of the movie, was absolutely hilarious to us. Just the best, the thing that made this movie so much better was like, oh, really like, all right, well, we have to go do this. And it's like, okay, I'll go grab the eggs.
Yeah, yeah.
But
And
I
then,
mean, that's
I mean,
pretty much all there is to say. Like,
well, yeah, I love doing stuff like that where you find like your own plot point in the movie. I love doing stuff like that. I think this movie just really, actually, you know what? I'll say this. This movie might be a good like Conjuring film, but it's not a good La Llorona film.
sure, this is
And I
totally fair.
think that the fact that it's titled that, I have to criticize it based off of it trying to be one. It had it been titled literally
Like
like,
Weeping Widow or something.
yeah, or The Widow or something, this might have been a much more excellent film, but because I was missing so much of the original legend and so much was changed and made, ve- the original legend is absolutely horrifying and very violent. And this movie just kind of skated alongside of that. Like, it's not really the worst. Like, there's been scarier things. And I think this movie just misses a ton on that.
It's fair. Let's do some final thoughts, and then we'll rate it, and we'll rate the films, and we're good to go.
Cool. I give this movie a 28.
All right.
Yeah, I think this is the worst in the series. I think all the others were kind of, I guess, like original property in terms of an idea. Like I guess the Warrens was based on true stuff, but like the Nun and Annabelle, like that's all like part of its own creation.
Well, Annabelle is a real doll.
Well, yeah, but the story is based off real stuff. But like all those movies, to me, feel more like at home with The Conjuring's own innovation.
Yeah.
And this one was kind of the more direct, like, oh, we're gonna take a legend and just make a movie about that on its own, and it just missed completely because they didn't do the legend. They just used the name. And I would suspect they used the name because they thought it would get more people to the theater. And unfortunately, it just raised my expectations and then let me down. So, the worst for me.
Sure. My final thoughts after the last two films, it's surprising to me that this one isn't all awful. A great performance from Linda Cardellini and some decent scares amidst all the jump scares provides some saving graces for this mediocre horror film. I ended up giving it a 54. I mean, again,
Nice.
not a great score, but enough that I would be like, you know what, I would watch this again on the pure basis of just having fun with my friends and making fun of it.
Sure.
Yeah, which is, I mean, I won't even do that for the nun. The
No,
nun can literally get some blood of Christ thrown on it and thrown back into whatever pit it came from. But let's go ahead. We're now going to go ahead and rate the movies from least good to most good.
oh,
So from
okay.
7 to 1. In our seventh place spot, what do you got, Adrian?
La Llorona.
Cool. My seventh is the nun.
Nice.
Not surprising. Number 6. What do you got?
The Nun.
I actually have Annabelle Comes Home as number 6.
Nice.
Number 5.
Annabelle.
Actually, same. Annabelle number
Nice.
5 for me. Number 4.
Annabelle Comes Home.
Number 4 for me was Curse of La Llorona. Number
Nice.
3.
Annabelle Creation.
Same here. I think this is going to get the same from here on out.
Yeah.
Number 2.
Conjuring 2 and then Conjuring 1.
Yep. Yes. Undoubtedly, the mainline Conjuring films are the strongest in this franchise. The surprising Annabelle Creation is also a fun watch as well. Even for me that doesn't like jump scares and doesn't really like horror movies from Hollywood, it does stand out actually, which is surprising.
Yeah.
And I mean the fact that I even enjoyed La Llorona, I was expecting to hate that movie, and the fact that I even came out of it like, it wasn't all bad. You know, so again, surprising. So
The whole franchise relatively fun. I mean, we're ranking them against each other, but they're all good Friday night hang out with your buddies movies.
except for the nun.
If you're looking for the good scary movies, this franchise has some of those. If you're looking for ones to make up your own plot points about needing the eggs, then there's those too. This franchise does offer kind of all of that. It's the fun, the scary in one big package. like I said, I'm invested enough that I would watch extended editions. I'm gonna watch the third one. I'm gonna watch the next Annabelle.
Well, we
It's
are
one of
going to
those,
watch the third one. We'll be reviewing it on our YouTube channel.
yeah, and it's one of those things, like, I'm invested enough that whatever comes out within this, I will watch. I'm that interested in the story, and I've followed along. Similar with myself and Paranormal Activity series, I followed along long enough that I'll watch the next one if there's another one. So I'm invested, and they're fun. Just don't take them too seriously. There's no Hereditary here. There's no
Okay.
Midsummer here. There's no The Witch. I mean, it's just all pretty basic scary movie stuff.
Yeah, these aren't trying to tell an engaging, thrilling story. It's you're going to this to eat popcorn and have fun. And
Yes.
that's pretty much it. So that's pretty much all we have to say about The Conjuring. And this is probably
Yeah.
a pretty decently long episode. 7 movies, probably the longest franchise fever we've done in quite a while. Actually, I think
It's
it is
the
the longest one.
longest, and Fast and the Furious will be longer.
Yeah, which will be we already know it's going to be our next franchise we're going to
We
do.
might
So
split that up into 2 parts. That might be too long.
for deeper
Yeah.
deeper examination.
There's more meat in each Fast and Furious movie than there is in each Conjuring movie.
I don't know about that, but we'll find out.
Well, we could spend a whole episode just on the difference between a regular mile and a Cuban mile. We need to bring in some, like, distance expert.
But if we're going to be doing episodes coming up, especially on Fast and Furious, how are they going to be able to know about it when we have a new one coming out?
Yeah, we post about it every time an episode comes out on Instagram and pretty much on any social media. You can find us at the Drive Back Podcast. We'll show up everywhere. We do have more limited stuff here on YouTube, where you can look at our beautiful faces, review movies that have just come out. We do a spoiler-free version and a spoiler version, so whichever one suits your heart, you can go ahead and watch. But if you want to follow us along or engage in some conversations, you can always do the comments down below, or you can go ahead and comment on any of our Instagram stories or posts. We do quick reviews there. We post whenever we have a new update in terms of an episode coming out. So we're always kind of up to date everywhere, pretty much. So if you want to find us, we're there.
Absolutely. And with that, before we say goodbye, we just wanted to say a quick thank you. This is our 50th episode of the Drive Back Podcast, not including our episode 0 that came out, the little introduction. But thank you for all of you out there who are listening to us, for bearing with our opinions here and there. We absolutely love doing this. We're doing this purely because we love talking film, and it's so refreshing that so many of you reach out, that so many of you talk to us, that so many share your experiences watching the movies we talk about, and continually remind me why I'm wrong about Good Will Hunting for some reason.
That comes up for all of you listening, like, at least once a week for Garrett, that he's incorrect about that movie.
But I hold strong. Anyhow,
So
thank you very
did
much.
Will.
Well, thank you so much for watching or listening. Remember to follow us on Spotify, on YouTube, comment, like, subscribe, all that wonderful jazz, and we'll see you next time on The Drive Back. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Drive Back. Make sure to be on the lookout for new episodes every Monday, and make sure to follow us on social media.